Okay, so now we'll start the interactive session, and questions from the floor are welcome. But before that, if we could have Dr. Sibtain to please start the floor again. Like how do you want it to go? Asking the questions? Yeah, okay, straight away. So any questions here? Okay. Okay.
There is a raging debate at the moment here in North America about stem cell research and whether it's ethical or not, and governments are going all over the place trying to figure that one out. First, in layman's term, can you explain what stem cell is and what is the Islamic perspective as you see it now?
Stem cells are undifferentiated cells which then can become any other cell of the part of an organ. So for example, if there is a problem with the heart, I mean, this is the theory, if there is a problem with the heart, then they can use these stem cells to cure the problems within the defective structure of the heart. When that is, in layman's term, what is the function of a stem cell. Because they are undifferentiated cells, they can use that cells in the laboratory to see how the cells behave, and they can also see how the diseased cell behave, and then they learn from that, and then try and cure the person. So this is in short what it does. As to what Islam has to say, in what way are we saying what does Islam has to say on the research aspect of it?
No, and further on, looking beyond.
Okay, I mean, if looking beyond, if it is going to be beneficial to the patient, then that would be one of the precepts used, because it would be advantageous for the patient and beneficial for the patient. Then by and large, one would see a response from Islam of, say, yes, one could use a research of this type to assist a human being. That's my take on it, unless Shaykh.
Is it when the egg is fertilized and then before it multiplies?
Yes, before it multiplies, yes.
Do you remember we had the conference on this? The very first one on abortion.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
We discussed that question there.
Why don't you?
Well, if stem cell are the fertilized sort of eggs before they multiply, we have just a slight problem here, and that is that certain of our ahadith talk of that as a potential human being. And if it is a potential human being, then there is a problem. But if it is already there, present, and a donor has given it, then there is no problem. The other thing we were discussing, if you remember, were stem cells developed within the laboratory. And even then, we had this gray area as to whether it was ethical, religiously, to allow growth of such cells or not. And it's still a gray area. But the overriding principle would be that if it is available, then there is no problem in conducting research on it and using it for the benefit of human beings.
Okay, Assalamualaikum. I have one question, but after watching the presentation, I have so many more questions now. But I asked my question to Maulana Shaykh Arif about the organ donation. Is it allowed in Islam?
We have differences of opinion in terms of organ donation. A very traditional take at one point was that we cannot remove organs due to various theological understanding that it results in desecration of the human body. Two, it is painful for the dead person. Three, the whole issue of blood money. Then there came a time in which certain of our ulama were of the opinion that if the blood money is paid, then the organs may be donated. Now, this is all after death. What about during lifetime? What about during lifetime? Here, certain were of the opinion that, according to the prophetic precept, that people have full authority on their bodies, they can do this, unless there's an overriding principle which doesn't appear to be there, which prevents a person from doing such a thing. But lately in Iran, organ donations have become permissible without the notion of blood money or it being disrespectful to the dead person. So Iran nowadays, you can carry a donor card with you and go your way, and God forbid if something happens, they can remove the organs.
There is also the issue of consent, that many ulamas or scholars would want the consent clearly given.
Which puts us in a problem in the UK, because the law is that if you do not explicitly prohibit, then the consent is there. But we have a bit of a problem in the UK that they're trying to pass a bill that unless we do not explicitly state that we would not want our organs to be donated, this would in itself be an implication that we are giving consent. So we're trying to come over that.
Yes, but that's right, Sheikh, but it isn't a law yet, but there is a debate going on, and there is a very strong lobby which puts the case for preservation of autonomy, and that they must give consent, or they must give consent in their advance wills to then have the organ donation considered. But the issue of consent is very important in societies that we live because of that principle of autonomy, preservation of individual sovereignty and such.
Wait. A question for each of you. For Shaykh Arif, you mentioned about the conference in Iran. Was there any conclusion, or this is just the beginning of dialogue? And for Dr. Sibtain, I was reading a book many years ago, and it said either in the 70s or 1980s, Ayatollah Khoi and Imam Khomeini had talked about something about artificial insemination. So, do you have anything to say about it, or all I read was that they talked about it. I don't know anything more than that.
No. In terms of the outcome of the conference, well, we had conflicting opinions, but overall and by and large, the people who had gathered, ranging from ayatollahs right down to philosophers and theologians and people in the care profession, it was concluded that it is not an easy debate or a discussion, and there aren't any simple solutions, and there is a lot that we do not understand, the nature of suffering, and to allow any form of euthanasia would be a slippery slope leading to other things. There were two things which were very vague and ambiguous. One, what the doctor pointed out, as to what constitutes death. And we had medical experts explaining to us what is death. But the conclusion, if you can say, was this, that we should not make haste in allowing any form of assistance in death or dying, and try to maintain human life as far as possible, unless it is draining the resources unnecessarily and they can be used elsewhere. But that's a different consideration altogether.
As to your question about the works of Ayatollah Khoui and Ayatollah Khomeini, I mean, all we have is the fatwas or the opinions to the questions asked about whether use of artificial insemination by a donor is allowed or not allowed, and then we have the answers. What one dearly wants is how those answers are derived, what hadiths are used, what Qur'anic ayats are used, what framework is used, because that is very useful when we are looking at other bioethical issues. And if you look at the focus of the presentation, is to perhaps go beyond just the legalistic way of arriving at a conclusion to using of a different framework to assist us in or guide us in making decisions. So it's an open question, but this is just a presentation to say that perhaps these frameworks are also available for us to come to a decision. To the scholars, I mean, not to us, scholars.
Okay, before we go ahead, we have some questions from the ladies' side. The first one being is, Assalamu alaikum. There is a medical scheme in England called needle exchange, whereby drug addicts take used needles to pharmacies and other centers to be disposed of, and in return are supplied with clean, fresh needles as well as other supplies such as citric acid powder to cut or mix drugs to ensure they are safely self-administered. The pros of this are harm to addicts is minimized, spread of HIV/AIDS is reduced, saving money for the NHS that can be spent elsewhere. And there's a pros of building relations with addicts to influence them and encouraging them to come off drugs. But then on the con side, we are directly advocating the administration of illegal drugs. This scheme is allowed by English law, but is it allowed ethically, Islamically? Many thanks for your time and assistance.
Islam operates at various different levels, obviously we know. When we have problems, it's not very easy to say this is wrong and hence do away with it. If we look at the way Islam was introduced, the Arabs were involved in the culture of consumption of alcohol. Now the Prophet did not come and immediately outlaw or ban alcohol. It was a gradual process to wean people off the habit of alcohol. And from there we can understand that there has to be a natural, befitting, humane approach to problems. Now, what they are doing there is within their own context, what they are seeing as the best solution for a given problem that is there, which cannot be curtailed otherwise. And hence Islam would say yes, as a extreme measure that is perfectly fine.
Assalamu alaikum. Dr. Sibtain, you indicated that the Islamic definition of death is when the soul departs from the body. And I guess the counter to that would be the definition of life is when the soul enters the body. Is that correct? That's one. And if, we find that in the verses of the Qur'an, well, there's one verse where it indicates the stages of human development. And then it goes, ثُمَّ أَنشَأْنَاهُ خَلْقًا آخَرَ. So it goes through the biological sequences, and then it seems to indicate that, and therefore, and then after all of this, life has basically, or the human being has changed into something else. Is there something analogous with respect to death? After like a biological sequence, then the soul departs? And does that have a bearing on ethical issues with respect to abortion or euthanasia?
What was the definition that I gave about death that I indicated? You said the taking of the nafs. Well, what I was trying to derive from those ayah was that this is what is happening. This is what the Qur'an is telling us. And I posed a question: should we look at removal of the nafs as a defining moment of death? So I haven't defined death, all right? The idea of coming of the soul and then the completion of the soul within the human body, let me say this, that I looked at the work of the personality who is sitting beside me. He wrote a fantastic paper on ensoulment. And that paper gave a very good indications of how we could perhaps respond to many issues. And one of the issues that we responded to was the animal-human combination. I'm just diverting a little bit because I'm going to pass that to him to answer because he's the expert at it. But the animal-human combination bit, which I looked at his paper, we came to a conclusion that the self-consciousness, the whole idea of a soul allowing itself to complete, if we create monstrosities like this, or if we put human organs into a human body, would we then allow that self-consciousness, that soul, to complete its journey within the body? Would the body allow that? And that was a question. It may not allow it. It may not allow a completion of a journey unless it is in a form that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given, that mold that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given. And so this was an irfani, mystic, ethical contribution to arrive at a conclusion that perhaps the scholars may say that something of this nature may not be beneficial to humanity. So the whole idea of soul, I leave it to Shaykh. Yeah.
You seem to make an assumption that with a human-animal combination that the soul enters the body. Where, how do we know that would occur?
No, what I'm saying is that, say you have a human body where you are now transplanting organs after organs after organs after organs, to a state where, for example, you may have so many organs which are animal-based. The question then is, would you allow the completion of the journey of the soul in that body? That's the...
The verses that you cited of Surah Mu'minun, they're talking of the emergence of the soul. And in other words, philosophically, we would call it the ability to reason or the potential rationality. Now, this potential rationality is further seen as active or passive. Now, we base our understanding of the laws of Islam on the utterances of the Prophet and the Imams. The conclusion was that passive potential for rationality is sufficient to deem the fetus or the conceived egg as sacred. Although it does not have the right to live in the sense of claiming the right, we have to confer that right upon it because it cannot claim the right. Now, in a nutshell, if passive, Sayyid al-Khouy did not believe in passive potential, he believed in active potential, i.e. once the fertilized egg has implanted itself upon the wall of the womb. But by and large, we find that the ulama interpret Imam Sadiq's hadith, salamullah alayh, very literally, that at any stage after copulation, it is haram to abort because it's a potential human. Now that we normally analyze to be passive potential for rationality. Now, if passive potential for rationality brings about the law of prohibition of abortion, then therefore, so long as there is potential for rationality, we cannot kill a person. Even if a person is in coma, there is no active rationality there. And according to certain definitions, the patient may be considered as dead, brain dead. But according to this take, there is still passive potential for, or no, not a passive potential, there's a potential for rationality which can re-emerge at any point. And therefore, the life has to be preserved if the circumstances are right, if the circumstances allow. I'm talking the economical circumstances and medical. That, well, potential for reason is therefore the definition of life according to the legal take. Yes? Not the medical definition. Per se, with us, potential, passive potential, and potential to reason determines the law of protecting life.
Assalamu alaikum. On my question, which I was about to ask, you have already shed some lights on it. You already answered part of it, but I'm still not fully convinced. The question is death. Medical term of a person is dead when the heart stops beating. And if I'm not mistaken, am I right to understand Dr. Sibtain? He says that Islamically the person is dead when the nafs is or soul is out of his body. To more elaborate on my question, Shaykh Arif in his deliberation gave quite a few examples of the people in the hospital on the life support and in very pathetic conditions, and a very bad condition. In short, when would you say Islamically the person is dead, or in the eye of God, when the person is not at all functionable? He is on a life support. Would Islamically be he is dead or not?
Well, first of all, let me pick on that the nafs bit, the removal of nafs and then the death. The problem is the determination of when the nafs is removed. We don't know. That's the problem, and that is a matter of debate. But as far as the definition of death is concerned, what happens is that when you go to and correct me, Sheikh, if you go to an Islamic scholar and say, now, this is a situation, a patient is in a life support machine for a year, there is absolutely no consciousness coming, there is some activity of the brain, what are we to do? When you pose this question to an Islamic scholar, the scholar will say, what is the interpretation of the medical experts as to how they view? Is there any, if they view death as brain death, and there is activity in the brain, then clearly it is not. It is the patient has still got life, according to their definition. But the patient doesn't have, is in the life support machine for such a long period of time. So this is a dilemma. The Islamic scholar would say that once you have put the patient on a life support machine, you cannot switch it off. Some of the scholars will say that. And then you allow the patient to die in that state. Whilst others would say that if the medical experts deem that there is no activity in the brain and brainstem death is a definition of death accepted, then the patient is dead. So there is still a debate amongst the scholars. This issue is still a challenging one.
From our understanding, potential to reason is the human soul. The potential to reason is the human soul. It's not a question of inside. You see, this is where we might be maybe faltering a little. Soul does not enter the body or occupy the body. It emerges as the ability for the body to function in the way it's supposed to function, and self-awareness, even if it's potential. So even if a